But let me go ahead and start. My name is Leslie Robertson. Again, I'm going to be chairing this session. And it is an individual papers called Reclaiming Traditions. And I'm excited to be here with Juhi Pandey, Raji Vankar, Magali and Berthon, and Yoshiko Wada. Really excited to introduce and to hear from each of these panelists. And so what I'm going to ask is that all the rest of the panelists, we're going to start actually with Juhi Pandey and Raji Vankar. And their paper is called Then and Now, Economic Empowerment, One Weave at a Time. So welcome, thank you for joining us, and we will go ahead and just let it turn that over to you and start our session. Thank you.
So namaste, and just my brief introduction I've already given you. My co-presenter is Raji Vankar. She is joining us from Kutch in Gujarat in India. And I think we're mainly here, or this paper that I'm presenting is more for her to be a part of all of us as a group and a community for the future. Before we begin, on behalf of both of us, we would like to thank all the members of TSA, especially Carolyn Charuk and Leslie, who have been so wonderful and patient and compassionate to get us here and present before you all. Just a little background, when I sent my abstract to the symposium, I have to be honest, I had no clue what the 19th Amendment meant for America. But the symposium theme, Hidden Stories, Human Lives, is what got me to submit the abstract. Hailing from India and now working in the craft sector of this country for 2 decades, one issue that has always bothered me has been that many forums and symposiums are for speakers and orators for the craftspeople, and there's no forum who wants to just directly hear their voices, even if it means there may be a language barrier. So this symposium theme gave me the opportunity to find a way to bring that voice, the hidden voice of a human life from our villages in India to you all. India is a patriarchal community. My life as a woman in India today is far easier than it was 100 years back. But this is more true for us in our urban cities and towns. Rural India, especially where industrialization has not seeped in, the status of women continues to be lower than men. But over the past 50 years, interventions by social organizations, awareness through media and open markets have begun to give the women in rural India a new voice. This voice is also confident today because of the economic empowerment that she has begun to seek. But we are here far from being completely empowered. Craft in India was a way of life and identity. Crafts like weaving, printing, dyeing, pottery, and metalwork were all livelihood crafts, but always associated with men. Embroidery and other handcrafts were the skill of women, mainly used for adding color, aesthetics, and beauty to their homes and costumes. It was considered a taboo for a woman to be earning for her family. I know still of some progressive communities who have such mindsets today as well. According to the 11th government plan of our country, we have 6.8 million artisans in India, out of which 3.8 million are women, and mainly hailing from our villages and semi-urban spaces. If these statistics are right, then we should be seeing more women in India running artisan units, winning awards, attending national and international symposiums, being invited to workshops, but that's not true. This is because the women do the work, but they're always kept in the back end. Here is where the story of Raji Vankar begins, and some more women in Kutch who have now created a huge change in a community which is very patriarchal and chauvinistic. I will go into a few more details later in this presentation, but I now want you to listen to Raji for whom this is her first global presentation. I wish she could have met you all in person. She will be talking in Hindi, and she has a small slide presentation. So what I've done is I've tried to translate her narrative in English and next to it. So if you could please follow that, whoever, and probably most of you won't understand Hindi, it'll be great. Apologies if it's going to cause a bit of a confusion. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and start Raji Ben's presentation. Raji Ben, आपका शुरू हो गया है.
हेलो, नमस्ते. मेरा नाम राजीबेन वनकर है और मैं अवधनगर भूज कच्छ गुजरात से बोल रही हूँ और मैं एक वनकर समाज से आ रही हूँ और हमारा काम जो था एक वीविंग काम जो हमारा पारंपरिक काम है, लेकिन उसमें एक ऐसा था कि वीविंग का काम हम औरतें नहीं कर पाती, लड़कियां औरतें, और लड़कियों को पढ़ाते भी नहीं थे और खेती का काम कराते थे, लेकिन मुझे खेती का काम अच्छा नहीं लग रहा था और मुझे वीविंग में बहुत शौक था. लेकिन जब मैं छुप छुप के वीविंग सीख रही थी, जब मैं खेती काम नहीं करती थी और छुप छुप के वीविंग सीख रही थी, वो काम मैंने सीख लिया, लेकिन जब तक हमारा खेती का काम चल रहा था मैं तब तो नहीं कर पा रही थी. लेकिन जब हमारा खेती का काम बंद हो गया और घर की परिस्थिति थोड़ा खराब थी, तब मेरा वीविंग का काम घर में काम लगा. मैं अपने पिताजी की मदद कर पाई उस तरीके से. फिर मैं मेरे पिताजी से बोला कि वो भी मेरे काम करने के लिए हाँ बोला और मेरे अपने भाई बहनों को भी सिखाया. उसके बाद हमारे समाज की एक नियम है कि वो लड़की की शादी 17-18 साल में कर देते हैं, तो मेरी शादी 18 साल में कर दी गई और शादी के बाद 4 साल में मैं 3 बच्चों की माँ बनी और उसके बाद 12 साल तक मेरी शादी चली और 12 साल के बाद मेरे पति का देहांत हो गया. तब मुझे समझ में नहीं आया था कि मैं क्या करूंगी, छोटे बच्चे थे. फिर मेरी बड़ी बहन है जो अवधनगर में रहती थी, जहाँ पे आज मैं रह रही हूँ, तो वो मेरी बड़ी बहन ने मुझे यहाँ के लेके आई और फिर मैं एक तंबू में रहती थी. तब एक अवधनगर में केशव जी काका करके रहते थे. उन्होंने बोला कि अगर आपको वीविंग का काम आता है तो आप खमीर संस्था है यहाँ पे, तो वहाँ पे आप काम मिल सकता है आपको. मैंने बोला ठीक है, मुझे वीविंग का आता है. फिर मैं खमीर संस्था में आई और यहाँ पे इन लोगों से मिली. तब इन्होंने बोला कि आपको रोज का 100 रुपया मिलेगा. वो मेरे लिए बहुत था तब, क्योंकि मेरी परिस्थिति ऐसी थी कि 100 रुपया मेरे लिए तो बहुत ही था. तब मैं ऐसे खमीर में काम करने लग गई. 3-4 साल तक काम किया. मेरा काम देख के उनको बहुत अच्छा लगा. फिर मेरी तनख्वाह बढ़ा दी गई. 3,000 से सीधा 5-6 हजार रुपये तनख्वाह कर दी गई. तब मैंने सोचा कि मैं अपने बच्चों के लिए एक छोटा सा मकान बनाऊं. फिर मैंने एक छोटा सा मकान भी बनाया. उसके बाद एक खमीर में ऐसा प्रोजेक्ट आया रिसाइकल प्लास्टिक वीविंग का. फिर उसमें भी मुझे कहा गया कि आप इसको सीखो और उसके बाद हम आगे कैसे ले जाएंगे. मैंने उसको अच्छे तरह से सीखा. फिर उसको काम के लिए हमारी जो औरतें थी अवधनगर की, जो वनकर समाज से ही थी, तो उनको हमको इसमें लाना था. तो हम उन बहनों को ट्रेनिंग दिया, बहनों को सिखाया वीविंग का काम. उसके बाद वो अच्छे से काम जम गया. मुझे वो बहुत अच्छा लग रहा था वो काम करने. फिर एक ऐसा प्रोग्राम आया विदेश का, ये आर्ट स्टूडियो था, वहाँ पे एक एक्सचेंज प्रोग्राम बनाया गया यूके से. तो वहाँ के 3 आर्टिस्ट यहाँ पे आने वाली थी और यहाँ के 3 आर्टिस्ट वहाँ पे जाने वाला था. तो उसमें मेरा नाम लिखा गया और मुझे एक मौका दिया विदेश जाने का. वो मेरे लिए बहुत खुशी की बात थी, क्योंकि मैं कभी सपने में नहीं सोचा था कि मैं कभी विदेश जा पाऊंगी. लेकिन खमीर संस्था ने मुझे ये एक मौका दिया तो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा. उसके बाद हम संस्था उधर गए जब यूके में, हम वहाँ एक वेल्स करके जगह थी, वहाँ पे रहती थी और उधर अलग अलग संस्था के लोग जो आते थे मेरा काम देख रहे थे. उनको भी अच्छा लगा और मुझे भी बहुत अच्छा लगा, क्योंकि ये सब प्लास्टिक वीविंग के कारण ही मेरा नाम आगे बढ़ पाया. फिर वहां से हम लोग वापस आए. तब मेरी सैलरी बढ़ गई थी और मेरे बच्चे भी बड़े हो गए थे. तब वो भी कमाने लगे थे और मेरी सैलरी, उस वजह से मेरे पास थोड़ा पैसा ज्यादा आने लगा. मैं सोचा तब मैं खुद का मकान एक बड़ा बनाऊं बच्चों के लिए. फिर मैंने एक बड़ा मकान भी बनाया. अभी आधा बना है, आधा अधूरा है. उसके बाद खमीर संस्था को लगा कि अभी मेरे में इतनी क्षमता आ गई है कि मैं खुद का काम कर सकती हूँ. तब उन्होंने सोचा कि अब आपका काम करना है तो आप खुद का कर सकते हो, हम आपको सपोर्ट करेंगे. फिर मेरा भी वही सपना था कि मैं खुद का काम करूं. फिर मैंने खुद का काम शुरू किया, लेकिन मेरे पास तब मार्केटिंग नहीं था. काम शुरू कर दिया था. उसके बाद अहमदाबाद में कारीगरी क्लीनिंग करके एक संस्था है जो नीलेश भाई है, उनको पता चला मैं अब खुद का काम कर रही हूँ लेकिन मेरे पास मार्केटिंग नहीं है. तब वो आके मुझे बोला कि अगर आप चाहे तो हम पार्टनरशिप में काम कर सकते हैं. आप वीविंग का करेंगे, हम डिजाइनिंग करेंगे. फिर वो लोग हम दोनों मिलके एक काम शुरू किया. उन्होंने फोटोग्राफी करते थे, ऑनलाइन सेल करते थे, मुझे एग्जीबिशन में अलग अलग जगह भी लेके जाते थे. हमारा वीविंग का एक नाम दिया राजीबेन ब्रांड करके, एक ऐसा नाम दिया गया. उसके बाद फिर से एक ऐसा समय आया कि मैं काम तो शुरू हो गया मेरा, वीविंग का भी, डिजाइनर का, सेल बाय मार्केटिंग मिल गई। लेकिन उसके बाद मेरा एक ऐसा सपना था कि उसके साथ मैं आगे ज्यादा बहनों को कैसे जोड़ूं, जो हमारे समाज की बहनें हैं उसको कैसे ज्यादातर जोड़ सकूं। खास करके विधवा बहनें, जो हमारे समाज की एक रिवाज है कि विधवा बहनें जो अकेली बाहर नहीं जा सकती, खास करके वो कम उम्र में अगर विधवा बन गई तो वो अकेली कहीं नहीं जा सकती है बाहर, फिर कहीं अच्छे खासे फंक्शन में नहीं जा सकती है कोई काम। तो मेरा एक इरादा था ऐसी बहनों को मैं आगे लेके आऊं और उनका जो है नाम आगे कैसे बढ़े, वो अपनी कला से आपका नाम बनाए। तो मेरा सपना यही है अभी, जो उनके साथ जो हो रहा है अभी अत्याचार हो रहा है, कभी कभी उनके साथ शोषण जो हो रहा है महिलाओं के साथ, वो ना हो और उनको हम आगे कैसे ले आए। वो एक कला की वजह से मैं चाहती हूँ वो बहनें हमारे मेरे साथ जुड़े, और जैसे मैं आगे बढ़ी हूँ इस तरह सारी बहनें आगे बढ़े अपनी कला के।
So that was Raji Ben's story. And moving on, as a designer and a person who started living with these people in the villages, I really wanted to move and understand first what our textile industry was. And just to give you a short background of us, India has close to the largest number of people engaged in the craft activities. We don't really know the exact meaning numbers yet. Somebody says it's 20 million, someone says it's 200 million. We've never been able to really do a proper census of it. But in that, a significant number are weavers. Our textile industry is the second largest employment generation in sector in the country. And if we add the garment manufacturing sector, then it occupies a much larger space. We are also the second largest producer of fiber in the world, and mainly cotton. And so it's very rich in its resources as the textile trade. And when I began working in the community sector and I started understanding the traditional crafts from a community perspective, it really intrigued me as to how and why, with such high resources and such high manpower or women power, we are still struggling to get our weavers their footing at large, and women are a different story. The future of India lies in its villages, is what the father of our nation said. And he led our country to freedom. Having traveled the length and breadth, he told us that to find strength and grounding, India has to live in its villages. A village structure was that of self-sufficient society and economy. Every member of the village had a role to play in the overall well-being, not only of the people of the community, but the entire ecosystem. Hence, craft was more a way of life for the community than just a means of livelihood, in which women played a significant role. Women in India have always been a symbol of motherhood. A typical Indian family with daughters will raise them for marriage. Even in the 21st century, more than half the population of our country, urban or rural, believes in this system. Women hailing from the craft community have had to always play a supporting role in the process and cannot and were not allowed to lead a family's livelihood practice. And if a man in the house decided to change his profession, then there were no questions asked. The identity and family name comes from the patriarchal end, and hence it is all about living in the man's shadow. We do have communities in the Northeast and in the South of India where it is a more matriarchal system, but most of India is still very male dominated. As we have heard Raji Ben's story, we can see from her life incidents that if there wasn't a significant intervention at the right time by an organization like Khamir, we would not know what would happen to her. A little bit about us girls growing up here. So girls in her growing years, as Raji Ben has also mentioned, was always duty bound to her home. As young girls, even the games played, I've also played them, was a specific game called House House. And for some reason, every girl wanted to be the mother of the house, not the sister or the grandmother. Women played a fairly great role in the freedom struggle of our country. We do boast of heroes in our women history. We've had world famous women singers. We've also had a woman prime minister. But if you go into their individual stories, you will see that they have all come from a place of privilege. And the women in the real communities that I call, who are in our villages, only got access to proper education 30 years back. Coming to where Raji Ben hails from, she comes from a district called Kutch, which is the northwestern part of India, and it is the largest district in the country. For centuries, animal husbandry, rain-fed agriculture, and crafts have been Kutch's predominant livelihoods. Each is an integral part of the local culture and landscape. Across the rural Kutch landscape, you will find a glimpse of the region's vibrant heritage, rich craft, music traditions, and a unique ecology. These are the source of local strength, identity, and pride. And you saw how Raji Ben spoke with a lot of confidence and pride herself. Kutch as a region has been a huge learning ground for me as a designer and a social development professional. In 1999, it was the first time I visited the region as a student and was mesmerized by the simplicity of its people and the vibrance of its craft and way of life. In 2001, the earthquake that devastated the region really made me want to go back, and I worked as a rehabilitation volunteer for 4 months and experienced firsthand how the people of this region are engaged in traditional livelihoods, which take care of their well-being as well as the environment. Kutch has always been in my heart, and I returned in 2016. Having matured as a woman now, I could see deeper into the social and economic aspects of the region and specifically of the women. Living and interacting with the community significantly made me understand the role of the woman in every craft practice. The younger generation was changing and aspirational, but the society structure was still bogging them down. In a general meeting where both men and women artisans were invited, one always saw that the latter stayed quiet. But if you did a meeting just with the women, then they all had something to ask for. And what we saw through a lot of our interactions was all of them seeking now to find their own identity. Khamir, the Craft Resource Center, has played a very, very important role for these women. There were organizations in Kutch which have worked with women embroidery artisans for decades, as embroidery was first used as a tool for empowerment. When Shrujan and Kasab's organizations chose to work with women, they had to be more sensitive to the society, which was far more stringent in the 1970s and 1980s of India. Khamir, established in 2007, came across a new generation experimenting with new craft skills, which up till then and even now are significantly considered male crafts. Meeting these three women inspired me the most. And as a facilitator and designer, I just chose to want to do something that would bring them out to the world. In the past 10 years, the women artisans of Kutch, many more than these three, practicing significantly male-identified crafts, are changing the scenario. Raji Ben's story is one of strength, courage, and belief, which she attained because of her craft. The two other younger girls you see in the picture are what I call the Millennials, and they are taking the craft even further. I learned a lot from the stories that they have woven, and I want to share a few. These are women who are now in this region working together, sharing much more. And we as facilitators and designers need to recognize this space and offer more collaborations. Over time, we need to hand over the ownership and the leadership of their craft to them. With continuous exposure to the good parts of the world, just like we're trying to do today with Raji Ben and this symposium, it changes their worldview. It helps them to improve their skill holistically and themselves as well as women. Women artisans need to be highlighted independently. In this context, the weavers, who have been significantly always thought to be a male-dominated craft. Today, Raji Ben has a Facebook page where she describes herself as a woman craft enterprise. Her brand name is Raji Ben. For her even to think of a life like this when she was shying away from field work as a girl, or when she got married with 3 children or widowed, was not possible. But it is first her courage And then the exposure and trust an organization like Khamir gave her, and now her business partner, Karigar Clinic, is why she is so confident when she says that her dream is to make more women like her shine. Rajiben is now a proud owner of a 3-room house. Completely, every stone and brick has been paid by her earnings. The other girl, Champa Siju Vankar, who I said is one of our millennials, went on to study a 6-month business management course at one of our premier management institutes in Ahmedabad. She's a 12th grade pass out, but the weaving craft gave her the edge in her cohort of business managers. And now she's registered herself a brand called Champa. These are snapshots from her Instagram page. Champa is also the daughter of Keshavji Kaka, who helped Rajiben find her footing initially. She's the primary bread earner now of her family, as she has no brothers, but she is doing much more than a son would do for the family today. The community of women weavers are playing a very, very important role in inspiring many more young girls to adopt weaving as a profession in Kutch. Initially, the men folk were opposing this entire move, and they were also upset with the idea. I remember when Raji Ben and Champa were given the opportunity to travel to Wales, they were the first women weavers to travel on their own. Otherwise, the women accompanied the men sometimes to a foreign country, but this time it was the first time. And I was questioned, like, are you sure they'll manage? And are you sure that they'll be okay by themselves? And I'm like, we have to try, you know? So, but now, over time, the men themselves are encouraging their wives, their daughters, their sisters to learn this profession, because they're also seeing that the economic empowerment that the woman is getting in the family is in turn helping the family also. And the opening up of their lives through the online platforms, etc., have also started breaking this mindset. We have a long way to go, but it's starting. But I believe, and that's the reason why we have Raji Ben out here, is because women from our craft communities have stayed in the shadows for too long. And the ones that cared less about what society had expected of them to do and moved on have found economic and social freedom and are laying the pathway for many to follow. Be in America or here in India, in the past 100 years, women are rising and becoming change makers. I thank you all for being so patient. And one last request, if you did find Raji Ben's work interesting, do follow her and friend her on Facebook. She'll be happy. But it's been a great honor for both Raji Ben and myself to present to you all, even though virtually. As I said, personally, I would have wished for Raji Ben to see you and see the United States of America through the symposium, but COVID had other plans. But I do hope we can enable this in the future, as it is people like Raji Ben who are keeping our crafts alive and our cultures relevant even today, hidden in one corner of the world, but with lives and stories which are human and grounded. Namaste and thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel like I'm going to be the applause for our panel, because we don't get to hear that from everyone that I know was just equally inspired as I was. So thank you both. Can I say too that let's go ahead and reshare in the chat for all of the panelists your Instagram and your Twitter or your Facebook, because we do have a wonderfully globally connected society and we want to support Raji Ben, you and your amazing work, as well as Juhi. So please follow. I do know there was a question about being able to purchase Raji Ben's work. So hopefully you can find that through Facebook. Yes. But thank you so much. Again, put your questions in the Q&A and then we'll get to those at the end. So thank you very much. Let me go ahead and move on. I'm going to be introducing Magali Berthon. Her title for her talk is Reclaiming Silk Knowledge with Cambodian Weavers, an Action Research Experiment. So I'm very excited to welcome you here, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really want to thank TSA for allowing me to present this early work. Actually, it's quite not early, but it's been kind of a recent development. So I'm happy to develop it and present it to all of you, and also get your impressions and feedback. So my name is Magali and Berthon. I'm an instructor, a textile historian, and an instructor at FIT and NYU Costume Studies, and I'm also finishing my PhD at the Royal College of Art in London in the design history program. So this research is part of that PhD research that I'm been conducting in Cambodia since 2016. So let me just start with a little bit of that story. This paper focuses on an action research project conducted with the Cambodian textile organization Kramayuyu over the course of 2017 as part of my PhD research. Before I forget, I want to thank Tekne and Foxy Foundation to help me do this particular project. Kramayuyu is a workshop specialized in cotton krama scarves in Tapuk village. Tapuk village is a small village in Siem Reap area in the north of Cambodia. You can see that on the map. And it was founded in 2006 by Tomoko Takagi, a Japanese woman now in her late 40s with experience in landscape architecture and textile curation. So Takagi recruited Chenda Heng first as her assistant and then as her manager of the workshop and weaving instructor. They were soon joined by Tiri, Chenda's sister. She's also a weaver. And Kramayuyu has been registered as a private enterprise at the Cambodian Ministry of Commerce in 2013. It comprises a staff of about 35 female weavers that all come from the surrounding villages in the surrounding area of Tapuk and Siem Reap. Due to its small scale, the workshop has given priority to on-demand production for export. Chenda has been assigned to train new recruits, which has left her very little time to create new designs. Chenda and her sister that you can see in the bottom picture, they come from Takeo province. So Takeo province here on the map is in the south of Phnom Penh and is considered as to the present day as the center of silk production in Cambodia. As teenagers, they learn how to make silk ikat weaving from their mother, Shendi, which we call hol. Due to lack of opportunities, they have stopped weaving silk in 2006. So the action research project emerged from a discussion I had with Tomoko and Chenda in December 2016. They both expressed an interest in developing products grounded in this expertise in silk, and they also said they lacked funding and time to do so. To the present day, artisanal weft ikat weaving is practiced only by a handful of workshops in Cambodia. So the action research project was implemented from July 2017 to October 2017 to mobilize these new skills through the production of 4 original silk samput hol, meaning hip wrappers in the ikat technique, in the polychromic weft ikat technique. And it was also meant to look at the range of strategies that these weavers would use to reclaim their knowledge. With the funding from the Friends of Khmer Culture Foundation that I've mentioned, Foxy, costs for materials and labor were covered for the workshop. And so it allowed them to work on that project. Just a few words about action research. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a methodology that is aiming for impact and change, specifically designed for a particular group and context, led in dialogue with the project coordinator, in this case, myself. According to educators Altrichter, Posh, and Somek, its purpose is, quote, not to simply describe, interpret, analyze, and theorize the stuff of traditional research, but to act in and on situation to make things better than they were, turning all the participants into co-practitioners and researchers. Following action research principles, the project was documented in successive stages: planning, acting and observing, and reflecting, which is kind of the rhythm of my presentation today. So I took part of the action at the start of the silk weaving process during 1 week of fieldwork from July 24 to July 30, 2017. So this is the diagram that I shared with you of my planning of that week. So I documented the process with film, photography, and a lot of interviews, recordings. The researcher's role in action research is, quote, to know, understand, improve or change a particular social situation or context for the benefit of the people who are also the participants, not just subjects in the inquiry and who are affected by the results and solution. So you take part into co-creating a project. This method emphasizes the participants' active place as legitimate producers of knowledge. And in this case, the goal was to create knowledge, to recollect knowledge available to weavers on silk and how it was grounded in their memory, body memory, practice, and community. So I'm not going to describe the whole plan, but you get a little bit of a look at it, and I can discuss that in the questions after. So in terms of observation, which is the first phase, and I'm sharing you here images of the team, really, of co-participants that I was a part of. So I visited the workshop to document the 3 main steps of silk ikat whole: the warping stage, the weft preparation, and the setup on the loom. I also conducted 3 interview sessions, as well as took photographs, as I said, film footage, and took notes. This project involved the joint effort of Chenda and Thierry, the 2 sister weaving sisters, 4 staff members, Sarin, Salat, Srepon, and So Kim, and they're pictured here on the right, working on warping the silk thread. Chendi, the mother of Thierry and Chenda, that you can see front central on the photo on the left, also joined the discussion with her daughters. And I speak a little bit of Khmer, but not fluently enough. So I relied on you, that you see on the very left, who's a graduate student from Siem that I hired. And Tomoko, also, who's on the right, helped me facilitating the exchanges and the process, because she's Japanese but speaks Khmer and lives on site. So I stayed for 1 week in July, and then the weavers continued to work on the project until completion in October 2017. So the first part that I observed, and I have some films that I have the links that I will share with you at the end. Starting with the warping stage, on July 24, Chenda, Thierry, and their team prepared the black silk threads destined to the warp for 4 ikat pieces of 4-meter length each. Chenda and her sister had helped their mother as teenagers, but they never completed all the steps of warping silk before. So Chenda chose to use a black warp, tek mao, as we say in Khmer, because she found it the most beautiful. And it reminded her of examples she saw in the past in how she said it the traditional way. To accelerate the process, weavers ordered pre-dyed material. It's mulberry silk imported from Vietnam and dyed in Cambodia, in a shop in Takeo in the south, and then shipped to the workshop. I did not intervene in the planning nor the choice of materials. I left the weavers decide everything that they wanted to use. The dyes they used were fast dyes, bought in Takeo province and imported from Thailand. I did raise the issue that this type of fast dyes is considered harmful for the environment and toxic for the maker's health. Weavers did not wear any protective goggles or gloves and seemed unconcerned for this particular round of action research. And Tomoko on her end took note of it. And I'll get back to that in terms of ethics and how you need to answer those questions. So here are a few shots, still shots of the film I produced on site. And the film captures the weavers using the vastness of the workshop to keep the 17-meter long warp in tension between 2 wood sticks at each end and operating the beaming process. The beaming is a task consisting in methodically winding the full width of the warp yarns without entangling the threads on the beam, and they would be placed on the loom and keep an even tension. In the film, you'll see that there are swapping places. The eyes are riveted on the warp, and they're placing their hands and touching it with their fingers to check tension. with little verbal orders, Chenda, that you see on the left, physically positioned each weaver around the warp threads, moving between the different stations, bringing the warping board for winding, and working on the warp tension. Once the warp was beamed, the team moved to drawing the warp ends through the heddles in order for it to keep even when the design would be woven. Chenda picked a metallic reed that we call chaktamani in Khmer, and it was like 100 centimeter wide. And she sat on the floor and meticulously passed each warp ends in each reed stand with the help of another weaver. They finished the process over the next day and then transferred the reed warp onto the loom. So that was the first part of documentation. And so at the end of our presentation, I'll share the link of the film. And then moving to the weft, which is something that we discuss more in terms of ikat, especially weft ikat. So weavers worked on tying and dyeing the first two pieces, because there are 4 pieces that were meant to be produced, to achieve the desired effect of polychromic patterns in the resist dye technique. Weavers worked through 4 successive rounds of tying, dyeing in one color, drying the skein, and then starting again. They manipulated silk weft threads under several forms on a tying frame, as you can see here with tiri, knotted into a bundle for dyeing, and then turned into spools to be finally woven on the loom. Weft is the second film I produced during fieldwork, and it captures those stages, including one stage called bauk, which consists in hitting dyed silk skeins into a metallic basin. So the dye goes deeper into the fiber despite the knotted areas. For the tying, each gesture seemed to repeat the previous one, wrapping the plastic strips tightly around the threads, cutting the remnants with a knife, and moving across the tying frame. Each knot builds onto the previous one to repel the future yellow dye and form the future pattern on the weft. The ikat motifs appearing in the final textiles are a product of repeated gestures of tying, dyeing, untying, dyeing, and finally spinning onto spools. So those observation times really allowed me to see that process unravel. And you can see here the dyeing process. Putting the threads on the spools and spinning. In the final day of my observation, Chenda and Tiri had installed the warp onto the loom that was mobilized for the project. And Chenda, that you can see here, proceeded to thread the heddles herself and slay the metallic reed. In Cambodia, weavers make non-reusable cord heddles instead of pre-made wire ones that you find on typical European floor looms. Having resettled in Siem Reap, led Chenda and Tiri without access to the network that they had in their neighboring villages in the south. And they had subcontractors working for them and doing that process for them. So this time they had to do it themselves. And after that process that took a really long time, Chenda started coating the warp with a bristle brush we call plain, with water with mixed tapioca starch to protect the fine silk threads. And once the warp was ready, she put the first spool in a shuttle to compose the motif repeat on the loom. And by the end of the day, she had woven a short segment using one set of spool prepared by her sister. That's what she had woven at the end of the day. Observing gestures bring this analysis into the realm of tacit knowledge, to gather material, technical, and gestural understanding of the complex whole ikat technique and how it is acted in a specific space and environment. Expanding from philosopher Michael Poliani, Iwo Smith-Loney provided a linguistic analysis of the term tacit. He defined it as quiet or without the use of speech, from the Latin adjective tacite. Smith-Loney also tied tacit to the term implicit, which means involved in the nature or essence of something, though not revealed, that is expressed. And more broadly, anthropologist Tim Ingold has argued that tacit has a range of meanings, from the silent to the unspoken to the implicit. So this theoretical framework of tacitness was interesting and allowed me to take into account the bodies, gestures, and voices of the makers as producers of knowledge. After my fieldwork, I received regular updates from Tomoko via emails. By mid-October, 3 whole hip wrappers were finalized, following the principle of color and composition that Chenda and Tiri had learned in their young years. This is what we call cum. Cum means design. So cum A presents a central field of small diamond motifs in white, turquoise blue, red, on a burgundy ground surrounded by plain solid colored borders. Sharing the second example, cum B, is also a macro motif of diamond patterns in red, orange, and dark green with plain red borders. And then the final one, cum C, was more complex, had a central field of small dots, and then some pattern stripes at the borders as well. So when the 3 pieces were completed in October 2017, Chenda used a reminder of silkwork to make a 4th cabin. Interestingly, she developed a very different aesthetic, experimenting with neutral tones of gray and black, and playing with a variety of motifs and stripes that would be deconstructed with stripes. It is only after Chenda had completed 3 pieces in the idea of traditional whole that she was able to develop her own style of patterns and color combination. The action research projects also incorporates a phase of reflection on the project outcome. One scholar of action research, Ortrun Zuber-Skeritz, assessed that reflecting refers to thinking back critically, not just about the results of the evaluation, but about the whole action research and process outcomes. So if I have a few more minutes, I'll continue on that. So that reflection and that moment of reflection really came through interviews. So there was one interview between Chenda, her sister Tili, and their mother Chendi that illuminated the challenges and strategies employed to re-engage with an unused know-how. This joint conversation offered a platform to explore the dynamics of knowledge transmission in regards to matriarchal lineage and family ties. Because in Cambodia, silk knowledge has been grounded in matrilineal relationships. So Chendi, that you can see here, is a 60-year-old woman who lived as a Buddhist nun in a temple near Bakong village, close to the workshop. And she came especially for the interview. She grew up in Phnom Penh, and where she went to school. And during the Khmer Rouge regime, she was evacuated to Kendal province around Phnom Penh. Then she got married and settled in Takeo, and that's where she learned silk weaving from her mother-in-law and became a weaver. She had 6 children and trained both her daughters, Chenda and Tiri, when they were teenagers. And then Chendi moved to Siem Reap to follow her daughters in 2005. She's posing here with these spools wounded from silk she had tied and dyed and that she brought back from Takeo. She stopped weaving around 2009 because her eyesight was becoming blurry, and she became a nun in 2016. Chendi, in her interview, considered positively that she had transferred all her knowledge to her daughters, everything about the weaving and the whole. Her testimony also revealed that this modus operandi was inherent to this particular family. Transmission of silk weaving skills has been predicated, in this case, directly onto economic reasons, while also being considered as a means to gain autonomy. Chendi admitted that she was satisfied with her daughters being able to continue weaving in their adult years, only depending on themselves, she said, and not asking her for money. And the discussion also revealed tensions between reclaimed and old knowledge in the reenactment of ikat weaving practices. In her youth, Chenda received a lot of help from her mother to deal with weft ikat. She particularly researched and rehearsed the stage of dyeing because she felt less confident about her skills. Chenda complained how difficult it was to bring back the memory to make whole, and that, quote, she had to research and learn a lot. In terms of outcome, to conclude, in addition to the successful production of 4 ikat pieces, the 2 sisters, Chenda and Tiri, managed to actively and efficiently rely on each other, as they called in teamwork, where they would ask each other, learn from each other. And when one would forget the steps, the other would remember. They worked from memory, discussed together and with Tomoko, asked their mother for advice and aunt also, and trained Kramayuyu staff. After the project, apparently the rest of the weavers expressed interest in learning silk weaving. Chenda considered that to learn weaving, she had to select people with patience and perseverance, but she was interested to teach them more. It would demand more practice to master all those different tasks and increase problem-solving strategies for silk weaving. Anthropologist Trevor Merchant has praised the social nature of knowledge, stating that it is realized online, in communication, and more generally in interaction. Knowledge making and cultural transmission exists in a movement between individual and collective experience. To conclude the project with this workshop, Kramayuyu only represented one cycle of action research, because they're a different cycle, and they could be followed by a new cycle testing new implications and modified premises in the future. When asked if weaving silk hold had been difficult, Chenda only said, "I did not have any problem with any of the stages, but all take a long time." Based on this first round, Kramayuyu has been considering developing a collection of silk scarves to diversify its offer in terms of techniques and designs, and to reach a more high-end market and attract potential buyers. Because right now they're just producing cotton pieces and mostly chemical dyes. The second cycle of action research would adjust the production process and material sourcing to make it more time efficient and sustainable, and recenter whole design towards marketable silk products. This would require additional funding, which remains a major constraint in indigenous, rural, and community-based contexts.
Thank you very much. So let me go ahead and make sure I have my notes right now so that I can introduce our next and our last presenter. I will say that that Kyushu was originally planned, but unfortunately not able to be here. So we are going to be moving to Yoshiko Wada, and the title of her talk is Transformative Power of Stitchery, Sashiko from Cold Regions of Japan, and Embroidery Work of the Nui Project.
Good afternoon and good morning from Berkeley, California. I'm Yoshiko Iwamoto Wada. I'm presenting a paper, Transformative Power of Stitchery, Sashiko and Nui Project primarily. And thank you for hosting this and all the hard work, Textile Society of America's board members and volunteers, and Caroline. I'm sure it's been crazy. Here, I will start immediately here. Today, my paper covers 4 sections: Stitchery, technology, Nui Project, and Sashiko. Why do I claim that Stitchery has transformative power? Stitchery is one of the earliest textile technologies humans invented. Since ancient times, before weaving was invented, humans created essential utilitarian objects by joining hides, skins, and bark. Stitched articles that have survived record stories of hardship, joy, triumph, and life sustenance. In this paper, I deconstruct the physical act of stitching and the process carried out by makers. The stitchery of ancient people was essential for their survival. Sashiko stitchery in mostly rural Japan served both functional and decorative purposes. And the members of Nui Project in modern Japan practice it daily to sustain their experience of well-being. In this presentation, I am focusing on the process of stitching as an expression through hands and eyes, namely an action of making. Anthropologist Tim Ingold gave a talk, Thinking Through Making, at the Lapland University's International Conference in 2012. Ingold opposes the Eurocentric mode of making through thinking as a dead-end where a maker projects an idea, object, and forms the matter to follow the idea. This mode of thinking is rooted in Aristotle's central doctrine of philosophy of nature hylomorphism, from the Greek word hyle, matter, and morph, form. Ingold argues that creativity flows when makers join with the movements of materials and our awareness as they feel their way ahead in real time, to join with the movement of making. And such feeling forward is essentially a process of improvisation. Finding one's way to improvise is to think through making. I find the thinking through making that Ingold describes in two powerful examples of textiles from Japan or in Japan. In Sashiko, with one, and the thinking and the feeling through making in Nui project. The movement of a threaded needle through cloth not only joins, mends, strengthens, shapes and ornaments clothing and other articles. It can also unintentionally or intentionally create works of art, record history, and give joy and hope, and often acts as a process of healing. Technology is the cultural foundation. Technology, high and low, continues to transform our society and culture, and is the foundation of our civilization. Early humans and a number of now extinct hominid relatives, including Neanderthals and Denisovans in the Paleolithic period, roughly 2.5 million years ago to 10,000 BC, began knotting vines, grass, sinew, and twisting them first in one direction and later two of them in opposite directions, S and Z, establishing a binary system that utilizes the tension. This utilization or realization of the binary system led to enormous possibilities in expanding textile technology over millennia. Not to mention much more recent invention of punch cards in the jacquard looms. Splicing, knotting, bast fiber was early technology, yet may be unfamiliar to many in the West. So I am sharing some illustrations for clarification, because there's always confusion in translating Japanese words, umu and tsumugu. And tsumugu is spinning, but umu is really splicing, knotting. I don't know. If anyone knows a perfect English word, let me know. After making a long yarn by splicing, knotting, then yarn must be twisted, of course, to spun tightly to strengthen. These illustrations are of wisteria fiber, bast fiber yarn making to weave fujifu, wisteria cloth. Getting back to the technology, splicing, knotting was followed by spinning wool or cotton yarns, cotton fibers. This yarn making is an essential transformation process to make threads, leading to processes of stitching, as well as interlacing, such as sprang, netting, plaiting, knitting, then to a whole array of weaving structures and surface decorations such as embroidery. Early hominids fashioned utilitarian objects using hide skins and bark, which are pliable 2D planers, in order to transform 2D into 3D objects. Fingers naturally did the work of knotting, binding, cinching, or making a hole with a sharp tool through which a strip of plant matter or sinew was pushed to interlace planers, transforming them into 3D objects. When was a more suitable tool such as a needle invented? Russian archaeologists found a 50,000-year-old needle, 7 centimeters long, about 2 3/4 inches, in Denisovan caves in the Altai Mountains. So the awareness of ways early hominids and Homo sapiens evolved by negotiating with what nature affords them illustrates psychologist James Gibson's Theory of Affordance, which proposes that the environment provides what creatures respond to for good or ill. We may assume that some Denisovans found a bone from a large bird and pierced a hole for thread, which afforded them the possibility to switch two planar pieces, stitch two planar pieces to make an object. The needle, which opened a door to a long string of inventions in textile making over several millennia, plays an important role in the lives of the participating members of Shobu Gakuen's Nui Project studios. Shobu means iris, the plant, and Gakuen means school. A threaded needle affords them expressions of their experience of life, the ticking of time, feeling, seeing, and responding to wherever the process and materials may take them. The creative power we observe in the resulting objects derives from the act of feeling through making, in which the makers are entirely absorbed in the process of hand and eye and have no intention of making a finished object or expecting an accolade for their artistic accomplishment. They are doing stitchery in the moment, using a needle, cloth, and threads, nothing more. The Shobu Gakuen Social Welfare Facility cares for developmentally challenged adults in Kagoshima, the city at the southern tip of Kyushu Island. It was established in 1973 by Shin Fukumori's parents and now earned the reputation of being an anomaly, celebrated for its wonderful results by social workers and mental health specialists. Fukumori was initially influenced by a member of the Mingei folk craft movement, wherein anonymous craftsmen responded to materials and processes that afford them to create objects that serve people. Fukumori offers craft-related activities for Gakuen members around the campus in addition to the Nui Project, such as pottery, woodworking, paper making, bakery, soba noodle shop, cafe, and percussion music band. Visitors to the Gakuen notice that there is no hierarchy among Gakuen members, staff, and managers, and come away with saying it is the happiest place they have visited. Gallerists and curators of the art brut praise objects made by the Gakuen members as powerful creative expressions generated from the process of feeling through making. Nui Project in English means stitching project. Nui is an adjective form of the verb nuu, where sewing cloth or stitching, or rather threaded needle moving on cloth, is the main action performed by the differently abled members of the project. Fukumori also attributes the mind shift he made along the way to reading The Theory of Affordance by psychologist James Gibson, which refers to all actions by humans based on their physical or mental capabilities as responses to the possibilities and limitations found within an object or environment. The understanding of affordance changed his mode of social work from one based on the conventions of normal society to designing facilities, activities, and care that afford Gakuen members to respond. Most modern Japanese, including myself, associate the Sashiko tradition with the Tohoku region, northeastern Japan, where the climate is colder than the rest of the main island of Honshu and Shikoku and Kyushu islands in the south. The Tohoku is known for heavy snowfall, thus a long winter. So naturally, rural people lived a harsh life with limited resources. Reinforcement and insulation of their clothing and bedding was an essential activity of survival. However, my recent inquiries into Japanese literature, as well as reading the 2001 Fowler Museum's exhibition catalog, Japanese Fisherman's Coat from Awaji Island, deepened my understanding of Sashiko stitchery practice and placed it within a broader scope of folk life in Japan. I am sharing some of the findings, including the clarification of etymology and unique maps indicating a wide range of Sashiko practices, not only in northeastern Japan, connected to the cotton rag trade across Japan. The Japanese term Sashiko comes from the verb sasu, which means to pierce something or someone. Stitching occurs when cloth is pierced with a threaded needle. Sashi is an adjective from the verb sasu, and since Sashiko commonly ends with ko, actually means child or small, the English Wikipedia erroneously interprets it as a diminutive form of sashi, thus translated as little stabs or little piercing. But what ko actually means here is thing or clothes. The word sashiko-ginu or sashiko-gino was phonetically written and appeared in documents in the 1780s and 90s during the Edo period. Identifying clothing with geometric stitching patterns worn by locals in northeastern Japan. The one on the left is the 1700s document. The documents mention sashiko-ginu, a short robe worn by farmers made of locally available bast fiber weaving in dark colors with light-colored running stitch patterns on it. A short robe is called in the north kogin, still now, as in kogin zashi, with Sashiko stitchery. Some of the Sashiko artists or aficionados know about kogin or kogin zashi. It's quite famous. But kogin in this context meant small robe, short robe. Cotton cultivation was established in the 16th to 17th century in warmer regions of Japan and brought distinctive developments of regional style sashiko. Worn out cotton clothing and rags, along with small amounts of precious cotton yarns and cloth, became important trade commodities transported to the regions where cotton did not grow, as the new cotton fiber and cloth were out of reach for common people. The rag trade connected urban centers where populations had more means and areas near cotton growing or weaving centers to seaports and remote fishing villages on islands and coastal regions. As cotton, the new miracle fiber was made available to less affluent populations through used and worn out clothing and rags. Sashiko was used more intensively to capitalize on the potentials of the material. They are weak. Initially, the use of stronger and warmer cotton thread on locally woven bast fiber cloth, which was rather cold or scratchy, not necessarily scratchy, but cold, no insulation, which came to typify the folk Sashiko tradition first. So this is Sakiori, and Sashiko details were part of Sakiori vests and jackets, protecting certain areas against friction. Rag weaving utilized old worn-out cotton cloth as warmer and thicker weft by tearing them into strips, weaving a thick, sturdy cloth called Sakiori. So this is also generated by the rag trade activity. In the Tohoku region, besides stitching on jackets, pants, vests, and aprons, they stitched to reinforce other textile articles to protect feet and legs, including leggings, ankle covers, heel cover, toe socks, split toe socks, and shoes. For protecting hands and arms, they stitched arm covers, wrist and hand covers, palm covers, and grip protection. It's quite amazing. And these did not survive that much because they were used for work and worn out very easily. Sashiko stitchery was used not only in cold regions, so now I realize, but also all across the country, mostly to make sturdy work clothes and paraphernalia. Fishermen's clothing called donza was extensive Sashiko was found in coastal regions and islands. I recently learned about the 2005 donza exhibition at the Fukuoka Museum on Kyushu Island, and these maps were based on the maps which were published in the catalog. Quite interesting. So quickly, because there's not much time, I cannot go into the detail, but the donza on the left is for special occasions. So a captain or the fisherman would put that on when approaching the port or going into town to sell fish. That's the one on the right, which is a boro donza, is for everyday wear. The Sashiko patterns on donza in the southern islands have different aesthetic features from the north. Unfortunately, there's no time to discuss that. And actually, when the fishermen were fishing on the boat, most of the time they didn't wear this big coat, but when it gets cold or at night, they would use donza. There are many cotton weaving centers on Kyushu Island, the southern part of Japan. The weavers incorporated cotton afforded them to do more decorative work, such as what Magali showed in Thailand. What's that, Thailand? Matmi. And so here, these are just simply totally stitched Sashiko designs, but these are on ikat cotton. And they cleverly use the ikat pattern as a grid to create geometric designs, varying geometric designs. So kasuri and katazome, which is another well-known folk textile tradition, all became prevalent with the availability of cotton in the latter part of, in the 16th, 17th century. And Sashiko was combined quite often with those cotton textiles. So here it is. It's kasuri on the left and katazome on the right. Just incredible variations in geometric pattern. The last example of Harakata Sashiko is from Yonezawa, a feudal town of ousted daimyo during the Edo period. So this is not a rural tradition, it's more urban, although it was a regional town, not in a central area. The low-ranking samurai were impoverished due to the drastic decrease of the fiefdom. Most of them had to take up farming to feed their families, and the proud and resourceful warrior class women wove cloth for trade and developed an extensive sashiko practice to mend, reinforce, and sustain the life of cloth and clothing. They lived in the Harakata district of Yonezawa town, where they developed the distinctive style of sashiko called Harakata Sashiko. While working with cloth, humans respond to the binary system of the stitch, positive and negative dotted lines, affording the maker to create patterns that are functional, pleasing to the eye, and sometimes infusing symbolism or identifying the wearers. They are thinking through making. The work guided by the binary system of Stitchery yields an innate geometry which is fundamentally visually grounded and powerful. And here I share Annie Alber's chapter from her book, Selective Writings on Design. And you can read that, and I don't need to take time to read it. But this strikes a chord with this thinking through making mode. After a few decades of post-war economic recovery in Japan, living conditions improved drastically. In fact, in the past several decades, the sashiko tradition has lost its original purpose and cultural meaning and become a craft sustained by small regional groups of dedicated women, a group of hobbyists. Therefore, this practice of stitching must be approached with a deeper inquiry, not limited to sashiko as a recently popularized craft in Japan and in the West, and viewed mainly as decorative running stitches to create geometric or figurative patterns on a contrasting colored background. The one on the left is a 100-year-old samplers from Harakata, the warrior class women's sashiko. So it shows that they had really approached it with all, exploring all permutation and combinations. In the past, sashiko was primarily functional and secondarily decorative or symbolic. Sashiko reminds us that the act of mending extends and sustains the life of cloth. In recent years, as we have entered the Anthropocene, we are awakening to the realization that the earth we live on has finite, fragile resources. In textile, we may practice it as a process of thinking, feeling, and also healing through making. Thank you for listening.
So wonderful. These were exceptional talks. I'm really glad that we have probably, if I wrote my time down correctly, about 30 minutes or even more for questions. So let's enjoy this as kind of a great roundtable. I am going to start going through some of the questions that were posed on the Q&A board. And again, I'm going to encourage, I will say to Raji Ben and Juhi that if we can get a direct link to Raji Ben's Facebook page, that will help as people were trying to find that. So you can put that.
I've added that in our chat box already.
Oh, good. Oh, perfect. It was just streaming. I'm trying to listen and keep everything up. Also, we'll say that Magali's posted as well. There were 2 videos that she wanted to make sure that you all had as well. And I think I want all of you panelists to just scroll through the chat. There was just, that's where the applause is. Thank you. Bravo. Wonderful. Truly inspiring. Let's go to the questions and answers. I'm going to open that up. And then Barrett was saying and thanking Raji Ben for the beautiful presentation and sharing her moving story. She said, that's a profound statement. Believe in our hands and in our craft to overcome any hurdle. Congratulations on your successful business. And she asked if there are any more links to where her weavings can be purchased. So that would be great to share that.
Yes. Can I translate that for Raji Ben so she knows she's got a little credit? Raji Ben, आप अपना video on करेंगे?
Oh, I turned her off. Let me turn her back on.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
हाँ, सुनाई दे रहा है आपको?
हाँ, मुझे सुनाई दे रहा है.
राजी बहन एक एनन करके हैं, मैं उन्हें जानती भी हूँ, मिली हूँ. उन्होंने लिखा है कि वो आपने बोला कि आपको अपने हाथ के काम में और अपने कला में एकदम बिलीव करना चाहिए. तो वो सोची कि वो आपकी कहानी और आपका ये कहना बहुत बहुत प्रभावित है और वो आपको कॉन्ग्रेचुलेट कर रही हैं आपके बिजनेस के लिए. और वो आप बता दीजिए कि बहुत लोगों को आपका सामान खरीदना है तो वो कहाँ से खरीदें.
पहले तो थैंक यू सबको जो हमारा काम जो मैंने बोला वो अच्छा लगा. और अभी जो मेरा सामान जैसे उनको खरीदना है तो मेरा ऑनलाइन जो अभी सेल हमारा हो रहा है जो अभी किया है हमने, तो मैं जो हमारा एड्रेस है वो उनको दूंगी हमारे नंबर के जरिए जिसको भी सेल खरीदना है तो इस तरह से वो खरीद सकते हैं.
तो क्या मैं उनको नीलेश भाई का फोन नंबर दे सकती हूँ व्हाट्सएप?
हाँ वही दो, क्योंकि ज्यादातर वही सब डिस्प्ले वो क्या करते हैं वो ऑनलाइन सेल ज्यादातर वही करते हैं. क्या डिजाइन करना है तो कलरफुल जो वो सब नीलेश भाई.
So Raji Ben has a marketing manager, and I'm going to send his number and name on the chat box, and if you just WhatsApp him, and I have his email address as well, he'll send you the online link. She doesn't know that very well, but it is selling online. So I'll just share his email address and phone number. Once you get connected, you can. Thanks, Anand, for your comments and your congratulations.
Perfect. Before we leave, Raji Ben, we actually had another question about how she started weaving with plastic strips from bags, and if she's currently still doing that.
So that is her main. So I'll answer for her. Raji Ben, वो पूछ रहे हैं कि क्या आप प्लास्टिक अभी भी वीव करते हो और क्या वो आपका मेन बिजनेस है? तो मैं आपके लिए आंसर कर रही हूँ, ठीक है?
हाँ वही अभी वही कर रहे हैं.
She is still weaving with plastic, and actually because of the lack of time, and I wanted to be more specific on the empowerment quotient of the presentation is why I didn't look at the process. But quickly, just to tell you, she works with a group of rag pickers from who pick up the waste plastic from Bhuj city and some other small towns around. They bring it, they sanitize it, they wash it, they dry it in the sun so it completely is clean and clear. And then they basically use the waste plastic as the weft. So they have a very novel way of cutting the plastic bags in such a way that they get nice half an inch to 1 inch strips, which once woven into the loom, they become nice little thin slivers that you see. On the warp, they usually use this nylon thread, which helps in binding. Raji Ben's done a lot of explorations trying to use even cotton. She's also learned split ply braiding from Errol Pyers. Yoshiko would know Errol, and has used her plastic cords to do split ply braiding as well. So that's her main space of work and material of work is recycled plastic even today.
Wonderful. Let me ask real quick. I just saw a question in the chat for all of you since we're talking about technique, and you all emphasized that. If there's some of your resources that we can share with the group on where they can learn. Essentially, the question was, can you suggest places that an American could study some of these arts in the US, potentially abroad? And maybe we can even just share that in the chat if we want out loud, but also any links that you have. From weaving, split ply braiding, Sashiko, to silk techniques. We all are in a place where I think we need that making component in our lives more. Absolutely. Does anyone in particular have a place that y'all have found or you connect to?
I've heard recently someone reached out to me about how she trained in Cambodian silk weaving, ikat, and that she was training people in, I think, Florida. So I can find that contact somewhere during, if someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly, no, it's kind of a small ikat, weft ikat, polychromic weft ikat in Cambodia is really like, they learn down really as a really young, from a really young age, and it comes from the family, it's transmitted through the family, and really stays in small circles. So it's difficult, but some workshops that are practicing are also welcoming people, interns or apprentices, but outside COVID restrictions, but that's something that happens as well. I'll find that name and I'll put it in the chat box.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Anyone else?
So Raji Ben also does workshops and demonstrations occasionally. She's invited, she has been invited to places in Baroda and Ahmedabad in India. So if anyone does come to Kutch in Gujarat, you can visit her and she'll be happy to teach you guys her entire technique from the process as well.
Perfect, perfect. I think, you know, kind of what Yoshiko had alluded to is that a lot of times the crafts become hobbies to where they might be a bit disengaged from their context and their points of origin. So it would be great to know if there are online workshops. So if anyone that is in attendance wants to put anything in the chat as well. So are there any online workshops that you're finding that are really trying to connect, you know, the techniques, the history, the culture, all the different elements of the techniques, and teach that as a basis? So that would be great to know. I'm seeing chats pop up, so let me see if I can keep managing. We'll keep doing all the different, reading through these. But let me jump back over to our question and A box. So, and this is great. And then as well, she said, Juhi, thank you for amplifying women's artist voices. Your and Raji Ben's presentation was an example of this, a great example of this. How can TSA better support more women artists from India? And I would even say from globally to reach new audiences, like in the symposium, potentially TSA member scholarships. And then I can, as a board member, I can kind of tell you some of our conversations we've been having as well, because this has come up.
If I can give a few of my thoughts when I was trying to register, because you have to be a member of TSA to be able to, present. I could register myself because I had certain details which are very specifically required, but it was very difficult for me to register Raji Ben. And even if I did register her with any of my other personal email IDs, she would still not be someone who would be able to do so on her own, so would require facilitation. And I think one of the first steps, if TSA can try, there are a lot of women artisans, not only India, even Mexico and other places, where at least as the first step, TSA should probably look at a screening process and invite some of these artisans to participate in the symposium, even if they're not members and they've not paid you to be a member, etc., and get them that first step inwards. And then once they've been exposed, allow them to make the choice of becoming members. I would have faced it would have been a challenge if I had to bring Raji Ben to Boston this time, because we would need a sponsor for her, etc. So this kind of worked out well, but it needs to, we could probably work in more balanced ways for them to come out and be with us more.
I completely agree. We're going to have a new, by the end of this year, hopefully a new membership structure for fee structure. These things have been in part of our discussion, as suddenly this year has allowed us to engage virtually, globally, like we haven't before. So we're trying to think through and make sure that everyone's voices, everyone has access that can. And so there are plenty of things we're definitely going to be working out along. But we do know moving forward, we all feel very strongly that virtual is going to be a big part of the symposiums moving forward, whatever that means, as we continue to know the importance of meeting in person. But, we've all gone through the challenges of visas and the extreme costs to get artisans here in the thousands and thousands of dollars that we just many times don't have as an organization, or any of us have. And so I think that, as we're talking, and I will definitely pass on your thoughts and maybe even your contact info, as a membership and outreach committee is figuring this out to make sure that we are thinking through. And I know I was just so thrilled to hear from Raji Ben, and I know those are missing voices. And so how do we create access?
Yeah. So what we did with the exchange program in Wales, when the Wales Art Council through Fieldworks had approached us, was that they want to do an art exchange where only the artists from Wales was coming to us. And I said, if it's an exchange, it has to be an exchange of equality. And then we worked it around, and we had the British Council that stepped in, and they kind of sponsored a bit of the program, etc. So there is a possibility for us to bring those like-minded bodies in the future for the other artisans to TSA as well.
Good. Thank you so much. If anyone else,
Leslie?
Yes.
So it's interesting to see COVID-19 playing, in a way, positive role, because the cost to attend is enormous otherwise for many. And also we are forced to get used to this online connection and workshops and so forth. This paradigm shift is not as negative as we think, and I think we can step up to different ways of communicating, selling, teaching, exchange. I think that is quite exciting, and the Textile Society of America is leading also into that direction with all of us. But I think the membership, as Juhi said, is a big hurdle for many developing countries, especially craft people who have limited resources.
Agreed, completely agreed. And it doesn't need to be a financial burden, because this is a community, and it's not an exclusive community. So we do need to continue to work on that. So, and again, let us know, as we come out with a membership plan, if it's not fitting for the specific needs for those you're connected to, please let us know, because it is your voices that help us to understand where we need to go.
Leslie, I think another thing is that the Vancouver Symposium, the three presenters from Mexico had to negotiate that issues of the expenses and so forth, and that Slow Fiber Studios created some opportunities for them to make some income, and we helped them partially airfare and so forth. So I think that sometimes if there's not enough resources. And if you are vociferous about that and reach out for help, and we'll be very creative in figuring out the ways to help each other.
I agree. And thank you for that. And thank you and everyone that has supported, and Juhi and Yoshiko and everyone that supported to make sure that we have artisans voiced and accessibility to these really important conversations. That's, and I think we're evolving as much as we can. And so that's exciting. So thank you to that. I saw someone else just say as well in the comment stream that this is what's happening in today. We have to look at the good of COVID, right?
Yes, exactly.
But the good is digital literacy is in wonderful right now. Everyone knows, and not everyone, but the access has increased exponentially. Let me go back real quick to the questions. I'm sorry, go ahead, Yoshiko.
One thing is that the digital literacy and internet travel and information exchange can go out of hands, and that we need to be very mindful of how to discern substantiated information and how to be resourceful in connecting, like you said, like-minded, also the important information which should not be lost, because people who don't have literacy are left behind.
Right. That goes into kind of the concept of documenting as well. And I want to say, Magali, thank you. The focus on process, especially all of you in the presentations, is incredibly important. I do want to encourage everyone, as we're trying to document as much as possible, to put your presentations and submit those for the database, for the University of Nebraska database afterwards, because I know I'm looking even at some of the questions about spelling and things that they're needing a little bit more content on. So there's a desire to have that knowledge and have that access to it. That might not completely respond to your statement, but I just did want to make a plug for making sure that we share this, not just this one time. So it looks like I'm going to pop back on the question and answers as well. Just Yoshiko, we had from Barbara Pickett, she wanted to know of any taboos in stitching Sashiko, such as not crossing a line or any type of yes and no's or do's and don'ts.
I don't know about that. I don't think so. But of course, there's sending body, which is 1,000 knots that the women made. People collected the 1,000 knots. I mean, not a knot per person into like a little sash band, which soldiers wore during the war to protect them. Wow. So that they do feel that the stitching and knotting infused with, it's like a prayer, infused with their thoughts and has magic power in a way.
That's wonderful. Can you do a quick, you can put in the chat box the spelling of the northern area where Sashiko was from. Can you just type that in the chat box?
I can. Tohoku.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And this is for Juhi, and I think for maybe all of you. Sustainable practice generally takes more time and energy. How can it be made more cost effective? Or how do we make sure that we don't lower the cost or what the artisan is able to make from the crafts that they produce? So maybe any of you, we understand the value of it, but how do we make sure that people that are purchasing it do that as well and are willing to pay for it?
Should I go first?
Oh, anybody. Yes, definitely.
No, so with specifically, if I have to speak about the plastic weaving initiative and work that Raji does, from her perspective, so the problem is we sometimes we try to look at a value of craft from where we come from, but it has to start from maker's perspective, and in their own well-being. From her perspective, she has only moved because of this particular craft practice of hers further in her economic independence, and hence I think from people like her, what I have learned, at least with crafts people, you've got to give them that independence of choosing what is their economic needs. Sometimes it can be way higher, but a lot of the crafts people, if they price their products high, they are mostly justifying the process and the quality and the design of it for them to demand that. And we're very lucky in certain regions, at least in India, that I can talk about. Our craftspeople have managed to get that kind of exposure in themselves because a lot of them are now moving from just being producers to entrepreneurs on their own, men and women alike. And so there is a growing consciousness of understanding the value of your craft and valuing your craft yourself. And hence, I'm sorry that I moved through Raji Ben's presentation quickly and you couldn't read some of the translation. But if you see her life's trajectory with her craft, she only seems to be in a far more independent state right now. And now, with the 11 years of work that she's put in all by herself as an independent craftsperson, she knows where she wants to go. So she's taken that leap of finding herself a marketing partner and has worked out a brilliant partnership where he actually, the Karigar Clinic, which has a designer, has a marketing, a social media person, they take a percentage of of the sales, very similar to how you would set up your own enterprise and pay somebody to do it, and so it's eventually the sustainability of a craft should come from how the craftsperson wants to dictate it forward, not how we as designers or facilitators want it.
Okay.
That's the kind of connection and relationship that we have to build with them, so that they are also as equally independent.
Good, thank you. Anyone else?
So Magali, how are the women in Cambodia treated? Did they have to fight for equality in the same way as India?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there are different levels of answers. I was interested in that particular workshop, Kramayuyu, because there's a Japanese co-founder, but there's also the manager was also Cambodian, which is quite rare. All the organizations in Cambodia that have taken part in reviving the silk sector after the Khmer Rouge destruction and the genocide, mostly foreign-based or NGO-based or foreign-based. So there are very few groups or workshops that are women-owned in Cambodia. Lots of individual weavers, but they're having less and less access to market, and their opportunities are really small. So yeah, there's a fight for equality now, because I think in post-Khmer Rouge society, there's been a return to a form of patriarchy in Cambodia, where women are at home taking care of their children. Mostly it's a rural country, 80% it lives in rural areas. There's also issues of access to education. So women are at home, they weave, and they take care of the children, and then sometimes help for rice picking and things like that. So they don't have the liberty to travel, to go to the market, to sell their products, or to have connections that way. So that's why I think NGOs and organizations have kind of gathered and built something around women empowerment. But in practice, it's way more difficult in application. And I was interested in that, Kwamayu, I've known them for a long time, because they were really a women's owned organization. There are not a lot of them. And yes, there's a lot of issues of rural exodus, sex trafficking, human trafficking still in rural areas. So emphasizing crafts, I think, is interesting. If you give the women the power to actually own their own projects and push it forward, not just being under organizations that kind of keep them at this place, but that really help them, empower them into becoming entrepreneurs. So there are some projects like that, but small ones that are pushing towards that. And I've been in my research interested in those, especially. They're rare. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you all. Let me go and do a quick run through some of the question and answer. Can I just ask anyone that has put anything in the question and answer that is a reference to maybe a craft school or a place to get more information, can y'all move it to the chat box? That way I can just keep the Q&A for questions for the panelists. Makes it a little easier for me. Also, as a reminder, right before this, we have to stop in about 10 minutes. There is a place you can save the chat. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, if you go to the chat panel all the way down at the bottom, there's a little tiny box with 3 dots in it. And you will be able then to press on that and click the button that says Save Chat. So with all the information that's getting passed back and forth, which is excellent, it's very hard sometimes for all of us to take notes. So again, it's right down there where you would type your message. It's a box with 3 dots and click Save Chat. So again, if anyone wants to add new questions, move them over to the Q&A, and then any information that's a resource for us, let's move it to chat. That would be perfect. Let's see, Yoshiko, did you say that in the Hokkaido area before cotton, bast fiber was used for Sashiko? And if so, what type? So it's a question about when cotton came in versus bast fiber.
Okay, Hokkaido is the northernmost island, so that was mostly Ainu people living there, not main Japanese. But in northeastern region, which is Tohoku, yes, the cotton was came in established around 16th, 17th century in a warmer region. So that, as I showed you with the snowfall map, these colder regions could not grow cotton. So the bast fiber, there are many different kinds: hemp, rami, wisteria, linden, mulberry. They had used bast, the inner bark of the tree, for fiber. It's like tapa cloth also. Is that all over the world? I think people did. They didn't always have sheep and other animals.
Good, thank you.
They were vegetarians.
And the other question about whether kasuri was woven in Hokkaido?
No.
Okay. Perfect.
No. Again, kasuri and katazame both became a very active amongst the common people when cotton became more available, because it is easier to work with. Of course, there are some other folk kasuri and katazame areas on bast fibers, but their bast fiber cloth is not as easy as cotton fiber.
Yeah, definitely not to weave or to use most cases. And then last question, Yoshiko, where can we find more about the Nui project?
I shared the link.
The chat box?
Yeah, and the YouTube, that was a Biennial link. I can just cut and paste and then.
Okay, we'll do that one more time. And I think a couple of people are going to have a hard time saving the chat. So let me put, if you don't have access to the chat, just go ahead and email me and I can send you, it's a kind of a PDF later. So I'm putting my email address, I'm putting my personal email address in. So if you can't have access to the chat, I'll send it to you, okay?
Okay.
Perfect. Good. I don't want anyone not to get, this is great information going back and forth. Okay, this is another question for Raji Ben and Juhi. That how many weavers, essentially is Raji Ben an exception to what the norm right now with craftspeople and women as weavers, or are there a growing group who are able to sustain themselves and their family through their practice?
I don't know the exact number right now. I'll ask Raji Ben. Raji Ben, अवधनगर में अब कितनी महिलाएं हैं जो वीविंग कर रही हैं आपके विलेज में?
हम कम से कम 10 बहनें हैं जो वीविंग कर रही है.
हाँ. So there are about 10 in her village. But in our last survey that we had done when I was in Kutch in 2018, we've got, the numbers are growing, and it's about 24, 25 women across the district now that are weaving. Women with any Vankar, any weaver family are very much an integral part of the pre-process and the post-process. But sitting on the loom is something that has only started in the last 7 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. They may have learned, so like Raji Ben learned weaving as a kid, but on the sly, secretly, she wouldn't have been allowed otherwise, and it's helped her. But now the younger girls like Champa, whose work I showed you, she's 21 years of age, and she's got her own brand. So there are a few like Raji Ben, Champa, Zakia, the Bani artisan that I showed, who moved a little higher in their professional growth, but there are women who are following. And it's been a huge, really a big change for that region specifically, and specifically in the weaving community and craft, which has always kept women at the backdrop. Also because the background of the weaver community at large is that they come from a community called the Meghwals, who are typically the Dalits, or what we call the untouchables. So they were anyway a community that had been marginalized a lot. And then within that, the women had a far back end space. But weaving as a craft has now been really pushed forward by the various organizations that came in, the Design Institute, and the social and economic status of the weaving community itself has increased. So that's helped now for these women to find a little more confidence to move forward. So the numbers are small. If you compare it to how many weavers we have only in the region of Kutch, but it's a very hopeful number for some people like us who've never seen women sit on the loom 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And that's great. I mean, I don't think 20 is a small number when you compare it to what it was, and knowing that that's just going to continue to broaden, especially with sharing and educating others, and seeing the empowerment that women are having through that. So that's absolutely wonderful. I do want to look at, we've got about 5 minutes. Let me just do one other question. Here we go. The idea of appropriation, and that comes up a lot, cultural appropriation, and maybe specifically to Sashiko, but also if you've seen that maybe in India or Cambodia as well. In terms of what have you seen? You know, is Sashiko, it's use by Westerners or use in maybe potentially by designers viewed as appropriation? And maybe we can start with Yoshiko, but also to hear from India and Cambodia as well.
Well, cultural appropriation is a big subject, and then the way you do it, the way, you know, it's just whole phase of appropriation. Yeah. And some are good, some are negative. Mm-hmm. But I think I feel now that the craft tradition is losing ground in many places, that we need to share whatever we have as a positive tools, positive vehicles, positive expressions. Mm-hmm. That I generally welcome the appropriation if it's not done negatively, meaning without really. Sometimes the Sashiko has been no problem because it is a people's craft. It's a stitchery, quilting, because there are many forms of stitchery and quilting all over the world. Because that, like Harakata Sashiko, the samplers I showed, Juhi, I just think that lots of them look like kanta from Calcutta in a really good kanta tradition, not the appropriated, simplified stitching kanta, but the real kanta. So to understand what you are appropriating is the most important.
Yeah, I think so. If I take it from Yoshiko, we have similar crafts like Sashiko even in India and across the regions, even though we have such diverse cultures, and specifically the usage of it is also very similar, where you use your old fabrics, your old cloth. It's used more by the tribal, the nomadic communities who are moving. So they're picking up pieces of cloth from different places and putting it together. Again, it's the same thing as Yoshiko says. I don't know what you mean by cultural appropriation, but at least within the communities themselves who have this as a home-based craft practice, they still continue to do it. Our old saris are converted into quilts for kids, for children. They're further destroyed. If they get further destroyed, and actually have a mat line right next to me right now, they become doormats, because I think the main part of most of our cultural systems was that we utilize our resources to their maximum. Nothing went waste. It's even in the food we eat. If we make chapatis, which are basically thin pancakes, the chapatis left over from the night are ground in the morning and made into like a porridge. We don't throw them out. Mm-hmm. So it comes from the culture or the custom or the value system of respecting your resources and utilizing the maximum of it and not letting it go waste.
Mm-hmm. But another thing is interpretation, how you interpret it versus appropriate it. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm sure Magali is facing the similar thing, that the beautiful design and technique skills have to be interpreted certain way to be able to be consumed by French, haute couture.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't have a lot of time. I have like a few minutes, a few seconds, maybe to wrap up if we can. But yeah, it's not like exactly appropriation as much as like a shift in consumption, because Cambodians wore those ikat as like hip wrappers to go to the temple and to go to weddings and ceremonies. That's how they would use them. But now there's no market for it. So the market is mostly tourist-based or foreign-based. And so products have been produced by Cambodians or Cambodian weavers, but shifted for a different audience. So that's different, and different designs, different colors, scarves also being products that are new as well. So it's changing the meaning of use.
Well, it seems like I won't cut you off. I think we have about 30 seconds, but this is an amazing discussion. And I know the point is these question and answers hopefully lead us for the next symposium, even in Boston and afterwards, to bring these to the table. Even before that, we are hosting TSA affinity groups. We have one on the craft economy. There's one on science and arts. There's one on historic textiles. So we're trying to get some more conversations going virtually. So thank you all. You are all wonderful. I'm saving the chat. Hopefully you'll email me if you need me to send this to you in its PDF form, and we want you to be able to all connect. And I encourage you to connect. I think that might be it. No, wait. We have 2 seconds. That was not the end. Connect and follow everybody on Instagram and Facebook, and share about this TSA Symposium with your networks.